How far back are you going? There were three brothers coming in here out of Georgia, and there was Bill and Scott, and I think Jim was the other brother. And the two older brothers had a shipping company that they worked on the Gulf Coast. And the mother died right after Bill was born, or William, and father remarried. And the stepmother was raising William. And the two brothers that had the shipping company didn't like the way the stepmother was treating the little brother. So they kidnapped him and raised him on the boat there. And they were coming up and down here, and they landed, work from out of Anahuac down there and all along the coast. And so that was the beginning. And those three brothers settled up around Finette. Then my dad was born in 1901, and he was one of 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls. And my grandfather and grandmother both had cattle, and they had horses, and they were rice farmers right there at the head of Gilbert Woods, there at the end of Clubb Road. On weekends, my mother came over here from South Louisiana at 7 or 8 years old, and she couldn't speak English. But I guess she was Herbert Lee was born in 28, so Mother and Daddy must have gotten married 25 or 26, and Herbert Lee was born in 28, and then I was in 32. Douglas was just about 6 months older than me, and then David was 2 years younger, and Alvin was a brother of Douglas's brother. Anyway, my mother's mother was one of 15 children. My grandmother was the oldest girl in that family, and I think she was the oldest one of the family. They came down from Nova Scotia and to Erath, or out of Henry, Louisiana. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, down south of Lafayette. And then they came to Texas, like I say, when Mother was about 7 years old. And they settled in there around what is Cheek now. And they farmed a little bit. And anyway, my grandmother and the youngest brother milked, I don't know how many cows they milked, but anyway, they milked for a dairy, Bagley Dairy. So my mother and daddy, my dad was during the Depression, he had a trucking company. He was a mechanic for Sutton Motors, which was the old Chrysler Plymouth people. He had worked in a battery factory. He could build batteries. And anyway, he was, during the Depression, well, he had the contract to haul the brick for the federal building that's in Beaumont now. And I don't remember, but I think he got like $50 a thousand to haul those bricks from out of rail cars. The bricks came in rail cars, and that federal building's about 2 blocks from there. They had to unload those bricks with these. They had these brick carriers. Anyway, it was in the heart of the Depression, and he said that in the morning he'd go down to get a crew. Well, he literally had to keep people off of his truck. Everybody was wanting to work, and he never told me what he was paying those people, but I know that sometimes he only provided them with a meal, maybe. And from there, well, he was working 3 jobs, He was doing mechanic work. He had a little shop behind his house. He was doing mechanic work at night. He was keeping the trucks running and doing all. So he came home one evening and he told my mother that he just had to quit one of those jobs. He just couldn't keep on at that speed. So Mother asked him, well, what did he want to do? Well, in the meantime, he was farming with a younger brother, Vaughn, who was, they were farming together. The other brother was working on the farm, and Daddy would help him too, whatever. But anyway, he didn't expect Mother to okay his desire, but she told him, if that's what he wanted to do, well, that's what they would do. And that was the beginning. He had a old house or something up around Cozemanville, and he loaded it. They tore that house down, loaded it on one of those trucks, and my mother's younger brother was driving trucks for him, and he was like 15, 16 years old. We had been going back and forth to down off Jap Road, which is now Boondocks. And we were farming just south of Taylor's Bayou and east of Boondocks Road, in what we call the Forks. And the Forks, you're probably familiar, you know where the sandbar and things are, down there where Taylor's Bayou and Hillebrand. Well, the younger brother was living right off of the Forks there, and then we were up about, I guess, 3/4 of a mile from Boondocks. Well, the brother-in-law asked Daddy where he wanted to go with that load of lumber. So he told him there was no roads in there. Everything was horse, and you could get in and out with a tractor. But anyway, he told him that just go there and turn off on that lane or that trail and start driving from there was some knolls in the woods in there. He told him to drive as far as he could go, and when he couldn't go anymore, well, just stop it, and that's where they ended up, on a knoll there about 3/4 of a mile from, and they built that house. That was in 1934. I was 2 years old. He said when he went out there, he had $200. After we were there, we were farming, and they built that house, and our well was a holler cypress log that they dug and made a well out of. And it had a bucket on a rope, that they'd let down to get the water. And later years, I think they might have put a cistern up there. But we spent, we moved from there in the spring of 40. We were in between South Fork of Taylor's and the North Fork of Taylor's. There were no other people in there from about 2,000 acres, I guess. And people wouldn't believe that we literally, sometimes on weekends, my mother's folks would come out, and persimmons were everywhere. We climbed persimmon trees, picked persimmons, and we literally picked grapes, or not grapes. We didn't have any grapes, wild grapes, but we did have wild muscadines. I don't know if you've seen them. They were in all those trees. I don't know what's happened to them now, but if mothers today would see the trees and things, I guess unusual thing that we had was a kerosene refrigerator, which very few people have ever seen. And I guess that was my first scientific adventure. I sat there in front of that kerosene refrigerator, and I don't know if you know how they were built. It's still over there in the shop over there. With a Frigidaire. It has a round burner like these little old camp stoves, That's down in the bottom. Then your freezing mechanism is up above there. And when they start the fire, they put that burner on, and they had a little old cap that you set on there, and it plugged into a pipe that went up through the refrigerator. And can you imagine there's ice in that ice tray at the top up there? And it kind of blows you away. My first job was carrying water on a horse to the shocking crew. Then we used what they call binders to cut the rice. I don't know if you're familiar. Basically, it's a mowing machine, and it has a reel on it, to knock the rice back on the canvas. And then we cut the rice while it was green. It was too green to, you had to put it in shocks. I'm sure in your books you've seen how they shocked wheat and the different grains. Anyway, you'd cut the rice, and it usually took about 2 weeks. You'd put it in those shocks, and you'd, it would take about 2 weeks for it to dry if the weather conditions were right. And that shocking crew, you'd be cutting like the field would be, if you can imagine, like this rug here. And it had a bundle carrier on that thing that it would collect about 4 or 5 bundles. If you can imagine, the bundle carrier would look about built about like this chair, and that when they tie that bundle, well, then the trip would kick it off, and it would roll down, and you could carry about 5 or 6 bundles of rice in there. So as you go around the field, you would form rows, kind of rows. Every time you come around, well, you kind of drop them in a row. Then your thrashing crew would be 10 or 12, maybe, men that were shocking that rice. And that field, those fields were anywhere from half a mile to a mile and a half or two from the house there. And I'd come in, I was riding a horse, and they had the jug hung on a saddle, you know, over the fort tree, and had a tin dipper for that water thing. And Mother would fill the water jug, and then I'd go back to the field, and I'd ride down that wherever those crews were shocking rice, and they'd get their drink and whatever, and then when it was empty, I'd come back and she'd fill the jug again. The conditions, that was the heart of the Depression, but far as we knew, we were never hungry. We always had 2 milk cows. We always had hogs that we butchered our own hogs, our own cattle, and there was no, the only electronics we had was on Saturday night, well, Daddy would take the battery out of the truck and hook it to the Silvertone radio, which was a Sears radio, and we'd listen to the Grand Ole Opera or whatever. I don't know how many trees we've climbed, and back then we played Tarzan off, even though there wasn't any Tarzan in our lives, but we were the forerunner of Tarzan. There's been a lot of adventures there and so from there, like I say, we stayed there for 6 years, I guess 6 or 7 years. At that time, Jap Road was just a dirt road, and the road is where the road ditches are now, and it was impassable, and to get over on this side, you had to come out Boondock or Jap Road to Burrow Wingate, and then you had to come through Fournette and come back down. Or you could go through Craigan's, but that was before, what's the crossroad in there? I can't, when you go down to Craigan, you know how Craigan turns? Patterson. Yeah, that wasn't put in there until the 60s, I guess, or 70s. When we were back there and living on the bayou there, we had the hogs. When you cross the North Fork of Taylor's on the east side, there's about, I don't know, 20, 30 or 40 acre slough there. I don't know what a slough is. Yeah. Okay. Well, it was full of fish. And so where we lived back there was just on the edge of that slough. And The hog pen was fenced into that slough, and we kept the hogs in there, and they could come up on the dry ground to the hog pen, but they were snake control for us. They would kill those moccasin snakes and things, and my dad's youngest brother stayed with us for a while, and I have a picture there where we caught a 30-some pound Opelousas catfish. So I don't know if you've seen them, but very few of them now. They're sort of a brownish green, odd color. Yeah. And then we were wearing overalls. If I don't know if you know what. And I have a picture, I don't know where it is, but Uncle Buster, which is that uncle of my dad, he was just in his 20s then. He was the youngest of the 6 brothers. He's the one that took us, the boys. He was sort of the gang leader for us. But anyway, I got a picture of me with that catfish hanging off of a limb on a little old bush there that we took into my coveralls. And that was, you live to be able to get out of coveralls, and get a man's pants off. But we had a lot of good times. Whatever. It didn't take near as much. You were never bored. You just made your own entertainment, from riding the dairy calves and whatever you could catch. I mean, we hunted a lot. Back then, Herbert Lee was 3.5 years older than any of us, and Daddy bought him a single-shot .22 when we were back there, so he would have been about 10 or 11 years old. And that was a bolt action .22 single shot. And then you'd buy a box of 50 shorts, little shorts, and Herbert Lee was a marksman. He could bring, shoot, he didn't miss very many birds. I mean, he furnished the birds, the blackbirds, the doves, the quail, or whatever, and the squirrel hunting. We squirrel hunted a lot. But in the forest, he was the only one that had a gun. Well, then in 1940, in the last year or two that we were in the Forks, well, Daddy leased the Grove property, which is that piece of property where, where Boondocks hit 73. Well, I call it Little Mexico. That whole, there's 320 there that the highway split it now. Then it was, 73 didn't come in until 19, I don't know the official opening, but they were working on 73 in 1949 or 50. That's the year I got out of high school. And we were farming that Groves property, that 320 there, and still farming over in the Forks. But in 40, when we moved over here, well, Uncle Vaughn and his family stayed in the Forks, and we farmed there. When Daddy got married and he went to Beaumont and started to work, well, he had a few cattle that were right there at, you know, where the old Boyd or where Dr. Sharon lives? Okay. That was the Broussard property where Boyd Road turns back north. Well, the Broussard property came right up there, this irrigation canal there. And that was the north side. My grandfather's 40 acres. Well, the first tract there just south, west of Interstate 10 belonged to Scott Clubb in them. That's, I don't know, Randolph grandchildren, the Dallasons, and I can't think of those other kids, but anyway, Daddy had cattle on that Broussard tract just north of the 440 that his daddy owned. And we kept those cattle up there all the time that we were in the Forks. And we moved some of the cattle down to the Forks back there. We had cattle in there where we were rice farming. So I guess you would say that was the beginning of Herbert Clubb. So when we quit farming on halves, on shares with Uncle Vaughn's group, but we farmed on the Grove, and then we moved out in 40 over here to where we are now. And then Uncle Vaughn and Daddy leased, then he got the Gill property, which, first, when we moved out in 1940, Daddy started buying in to a section there where, where our home place is. It was built in 1903 on that house, and they had about 30 or 40 heirs to that tract. Anyway, after we moved over there, well, Daddy got a lease on the Gill property, which was between the 320 and the section that we're on now. And so Daddy never farmed with Uncle Vaughn after we moved to the Forks over there, but they were always on the same piece of property. Actually, Daddy was renting the property and he'd lease him part of it,
Where the horses are kept, y'all built that barn in the 30s, was it?
No, we built that barn after the war in 40, I guess about 47, after the war. They quit making pickups and things during the war. You couldn't, when the Second World War broke out in 1941, we were living over there where we are now, the headquarters. And I can remember Andrew LeBron he was home on furlough, and we were branding calves in a pen right there. But there was a barn right where the chicken house is. There was a big barn there, and then there was a cattle pen right behind it. And then all we had was radios, for transfer. And anyway, I'll never forget Andrew was holding that calf down, and some of Jinx Wilbur's friends, I don't know, they had a radio. Anyway, they came up there and told us that the Japs had bombed Pearl Harbor. And I can remember the exact words. Andrew said, well, my ass is mud. He said he had to catch the next train out. And he was shipped out, and he went to Australia. And he spent his whole time during the war. He never got on the battlefield. Those are moments you can't remember. But while we were back in the Forks back there, one of the things that happened that I'll never forget, we had Alex Cragen was a young boy that worked for my dad. And he worked for Uncle Mon too. And it was during the summer, Uncle Mon pulled up in the pickup, and he had Alex in the truck with him. And just the straps of his undershirt was still on him. He was filling a tractor with gasoline in the summer. Then we used buckets and funnels. We carried our gasoline in 55-gallon drums. You didn't have any. And Uncle Bon pulled up there in the yard, and Alex was in that truck. Mother went in the house. I remember she went in there and got a pitcher of cream or something, came out there and told him to drink that. He was all burned. He died in a few days. I guess I would rate my parents at the top of the scale. My daddy, he worked every day. We worked beside him. He never raised his voice, but he and Mother got along. But I'll never forget, I only saw my mother cry one time, and that was when we were back there in the Forks, and I don't know, we were eating supper, and one of us wanted some more rice, and Mother didn't have any more rice, and Daddy said something about it. He didn't fuss at her or anything. And she told him that there would always be rice on the table from then on. And it was. But my mother was, she was a small woman. I guess mother was what, about 5'3", weighed 130-some pounds. And that's the only time that I ever saw she or Daddy in disagreement or anything. And it wasn't disagreement either, but it was just, and they were, my dad wasn't, hard to work for. He always worked beside us, but he always said that they shouldn't have the word cane in the English language. And he was a jack of all trades, and he'd send us on a job, and if we'd come back and say, well, we can't do it, well, he'd say, yes, we can do it. And we'd turn around, he'd go with us, and we've done many things that people wouldn't believe, He was, he only whipped me one time, and that was while we were down there. And my dad, when we were in the Forks, and I told you we had the cattle back up on Gilbert, north of Gilbert Woods there. Well, Daddy and Herbert Lee were going to work cows. And Daddy pulled the truck up by the house, and he went into the house or something, and I crawled in the truck and got down there, and he told me to get out, and I had a stick shift in there, and finally he pulled me loose off there, and Mother helped him, and he went in there and got a razor strap and whipped me with a razor strap. I don't know if you know what a razor is. Yeah. It doesn't hurt too bad, but it scares the hell out of you, I'll tell you for sure. And that's the only whipping I ever got from my dad. And I had one from my mother. After we moved over, I was telling you about that barn and that pen behind it. Well, Herbert, we had to milk those 2 cows every morning. And of course, if you ever milked a half Brahma cow, when we were in the Forks, we had a spotted cow. She was a Holstein cross, and a Jersey cow there. And I milked some on them, but once we moved out over here, well, I milked all the time. Herbert and I milked all the time. And in the winter and most time in the summer, that big barn had 3 or 4 stalls in it. And you want to always be the man on the left-hand side, the furthest left, in the milking there, because you could squirt the milk over on the cow in the next stall. And she'd either kick the bucket over or anyway, you didn't always go in with the cleanest or the most milk. And so that morning, well, in the summer sometimes those stalls would get nasty and dirty. Well, we just take a bucket and we'd go out in that wooden lot and put a bucket down and we'd milk our cows there. And so anyway, we were milking, but Mother told us that if y'all come back in here, if y'all get back in a milk fight or something and lose this milk, I'm going to whip you. Well, we had our little milk fight and she was watching us. So when we walked in that hall on the east end, well, she stepped across in the front on the west end. And then we were working, we had a team of horses, and we had the harnesses and everything on the stall wall. And then we were using rope reins as reins on those horses. She made us get down on our knees and she whipped us with that rope. And the whipping wasn't bad, but Shorty was a black fella that had been working for us for years. And he thought it was kind of funny. So, Mother always kept a pen of old geese, big old, I don't know if you've seen big old gray geese. And we had a yard right behind the house, and that's where she would hatch out the little ones. Well, it was past hatching time and it had some eggs that didn't hatch. So Shorty came in that night. Well, we got even with him with the rotten eggs. But, okay, back on the cattle, you were talking about the beginning of the cattle. Well, my dad had those cattle up there. And then the tradition was that my grandmother on my daddy's side, whenever the firstborn, they had a lot of horses too. Well, she gave Herbert Lee a filly colt, and we named her Betsy. And then when another child was born in that family, well, that older child had to give the first colt off of there. And right now, I just gave Jennings a filly colt that is out of that same generation. I've kept that line going all through those years. Still got about 3 of them, and I hope that I have a couple of more mares bred to see if they're gonna keep the bloodline going. And on the cows, a new birth, well, Daddy would give you a heifer calf. And you didn't pass that one down, though. That was yours, And up until you got about 10 head, well, you would sell your calves. Well, he would take your bull calves and sell them and give you a heifer for it. So that's the way that I started. Each one of us started our herd. And we were rice farming too, but the rice farming, I guess the first crop that Herberly and I had together, we had like 75 or 100 acres in 1950, I guess it was. Anyway, on the cattle, once we moved over here, well, we opened an account, Herbert Clubb Cattle. It was just Herbert Clubb. And it was a cattle account that we put all the money. Anyway, that account had been active from, that was in the 40s, I guess. In 1950, I guess, I was out of high school when I got out of college in 55. But Herberly, the Korean War started in 1951, I believe it was. Herberly joined the Air Force, and at that time, he and I had, we had like 75 acres of rice together. And so he went into the service, and I had gone to the service board then. That's when they were drafting people to go, into the Army. Well, I'd gone up and talked to the enlisted officer that one. Anyway, Herberly came home on furlough, and so I told him what I talked about going. Anyway, he told me that if I'd stay at home and help Daddy, because there was no labor then. Daddy was farming all that, and then we had that little bit of rice together, and told me, why not stay home and take care of that part of it. And so when the war was over, or when Herberly came back in 1955, I guess it was, we had acreage control came in right after the Second World War in the 40s. And you had to have a permit to farm, and they put in acreage control right after the Second World War. And that's when the Korean War broke out in 50 or 51. Well, Herberly got out of service. I was out of college. That's in 55. And David was out of school. And they had put acreage control back on. What they did, they issued allotments based on past history of farming. Well, when they were in the Army, they didn't have any history. Well, but due that Herberly and I had that few acres, well, we got 35 acres of base is all we got. Like Douglas got 40 acres of base, but he didn't have any. They just gave him 40. Anyway, Daddy was cut back so much, well, we had to do something else. And So anyway, we met, and everybody decided that we was going to still want to stay farming. And I told them that I'd go ahead. I was out of college, so I went back and got a teaching certificate and went to work for the school teaching. And then Herbert Lee, and I told him that I wasn't going to stay there if as soon as I could, that we would, I wanted to get back into farming. And so we bought a place in Mississippi because allotments were on the land there. In Texas, it was what I'd call a hip pocket. It was just a permit to farm if you had a history of where you'd been farming for so many years. Well, you could go lease a piece of property and you could farm on it with your base. And the penalty for outlawing was the value of an acre of production, so there's no way you could do that. But anyway, Mississippi and Louisiana, the base, we had a choice when we went back when they put the controls back on. Well, Texas had chosen I call it a hip pocket base, and Louisiana and Mississippi, because they had a lot of big landowners that owned all that, Well, they went the other route, and that's the reason we went to Mississippi, bought a place, stayed there for about 3 years, I guess, and then we bought a place in Louisiana in 1960, and that's when we incorporated. And meantime, in that time period between 40 something, 45 and 50, well, we had farmed over here with Daddy, just a four-way partnership deal. But when we went to Louisiana, we incorporated in 1960 because all of us were married, we were getting kids to get protections. And we incorporated then, and we farmed that away on a fourth, the three brothers and my dad, the fourth piece. And when Daddy decided to kind of slack up and quit farming, well, the three brothers of us farmed 3C, and we farmed under that for quite a few years, and that's the way we farmed in Louisiana. We farmed on Herbert Clubb and Sons Inc. over there. And over here, we went back to 3C, like I say, the three brothers. And that's about, but in the meantime, well, the cattle herd was building up. And so I've kind of ignored the cattle side of it, and I need to go back and in 1955 when all of us got back, well, and we decided we were going to do something else. Well, that's when I began to spread out. I substituted the cattle for the rice. The rice was under control. But what we did on the cattle, that was in about 1955. The tax rate was, income tax was almost 50%. I don't know exactly what it maxed out to, but a cow that had a calf, you could sell and use capital gains. So you save like 30-some% on your taxes. So we started building a herd and selling cattle, grown stuff, And mainly we went from like 300 and some head to 1,500 head of cattle on government money because you didn't have to, if you were on cash basis, you didn't have to report inventory. So that's where we ended up where we are now.
So how'd y'all come up with that? I don't want to call it a scheme, but how did y'all figure that out?
Well, I just looked at, I have a business degree, and I've just always, I've done a lot of deals whenever you have to drive an old tractor. It's not air conditioned, and 8, 10, 12 hours a day. What I didn't tell you is from the time in 1940 when we moved over here, I learned how to drive on a 20 horsepower farm-all tractor, and Herbert Lee, we had 2 tractors. We had a 40 horsepower international tractor, and when we were plowing ground, original breaking ground, my tractor would pull a 3-bottom 10. That's covering 30 inches in a round and running at 2.5 miles an hour. Well, you can do a lot of figuring, Yeah. So I learned a lot of math and whenever we could work, you could do maybe 8 or 10 acres a day. And that wasn't a 8-hour day either. And this old tough black ground, we had lug tractors in, Well, we didn't get rubber tire tractors until the 50s. And the maximum horsepower, then we went up to the WD9s or WR9s, and they were 55 drawbar horsepower. And the 40 horsepower tractor that Herbert Lee had, he pulled a 3-bottom 12. So he gained 6 inches on me in a round. And so you learn a lot of, and the other thing that most people don't realize, we never had hydraulics until these were all manual regulated lifts and whatever. No hydraulics on it. And you haven't lived until you've driven a lug tractor with front wheel with rim. I don't know if you've seen a iron front wheel tractor. It had a blade, it had a raised blade on it, so it would turn. And it just took horsepower to drive those all day. But before back when we first moved over here in the 40s, Herbert and I butted levees with a slip. I don't know if you have any idea what that is. But the little Ford tractors and things that had the little bucket on the back that was kind of made like this chair here that you scoop that up. Well, the original version of that bucket was pulled by a horse. It was just that it had a bale on it, and you had two arms in the back, and you regulated how much dirt and stuff you had to catch a hold with it, or if you got too much, well, you either had to let go or that thing would flip over with you. And so we had an old black horse that pulled that slip. And Herbert and I would butt levees with it. And the old horse, he sort of had a governor on him. Whenever you'd get a load on him, well, he would really go to work. And so when you were doing that, well, you had both hands on the slip. So somebody had to regulate the horse. Well, Daddy, he had to saddle the horse. We got where we had to put a saddle on him because we weren't big enough to handle the reins. And so that's an adventure.
Yes, sir.
So those are the good old days.
Yeah.
When we moved over here and started farming on the Gill property, the pumps we had there, the tractors had a pulley system on them. And we ran these pumps with flat belts. The pumps were upright on some of them. Some of them were centrifugal pumps, which they ran with in other words, they were suction that ran with flat belts. And then we came along with what they called the low lift. That's the ones in that pipe, Those centrifugal, they're like a little, there's suction on them. So you got to cut off all the air. And so with low lift, they've got a prop in the bottom of the pipe.
Yes, sir.
And when it turns fast enough, that forces the water out. But those centrifugal, you got to prime them. And we, over on the Gill property, on our property, we just had the centrifugal pump. But on the Gills, well, they had a centrifugal pump too. But they had a 2-cylinder Fairbanks Morris diesel motor. And the cylinder's about like a 15-gallon drum on that thing. And we had to prime those centrifugals with a bucket of water Man, it's just about time you think you got one of them prime. That Fairbanks Morris motor, it didn't run but 350 RPM. And so that one had a 20-inch pump on it, a centrifugal.
So going back to the account that's been open since 1940s. I saw in a couple of newspaper articles that, like during storms and stuff, you're kind of quoted saying, "You got to have a good relationship with your banker." And I guess how does that come about? How have you been with the same banker?
No. Well, I'll go back on the banking story. In 1949 or 50, my dad had been doing business with the old American National Bank. And they had two brothers, Mr. B.B. Henderson and Bill Henderson, were vice presidents in that bank. It was on the corner of Orleans and, Mom, what's the Forsyth? I think yeah. Anyway, I had borrowed money and I bought a new International Rice Field Special 55 horsepower tractor. And we had a dry year there. And so at the end of the year, well, I went up there and I went in Mr. Bill and I told him, I said, well, I guess I'm gonna have to bring in that tractor in because I said, there's no dang way I can make the payments on it. So I'll never forget, he said, sit down, young man, let me tell you something. He said, look, he said, I'm going to take care of the financial end of this. And he said, I don't have any use for that tractor. He said, I can't do anything with it. So you just don't worry about the money side and you get up and go back out there and go to work. And that's what I did. There was an error in there when all of these Roy Roger hamburger deals, all these little private businesses, food and all that, the banks, and that's when the savings and loan, a bunch of them went under. Well, the banks was financing a lot of things, and you learn a lot about banking that you are not told. Anyway, but back then, you mortgage your land, you mortgage your cattle, your equipment, and all these other things. And so when they had that money crisis then, well, there was several of us that was doing business with American National Bank. I think it had already changed over to Capital then. I don't remember what one was. Anyway, they had everything, just about everything we had was under mortgage to the banks. And these little businesses started going under. Well, it put pressure on the banks, their financial deal. And so they just made our job harder. I mean, they kept putting the screws on us. And Mr. Bill and them, they retired, and the banks brought in some younger personnel. And anyway, we had made a sizable loan and made arrangements. The way they loaned money, they loaned so much for production loans. And then, but in the meantime, in 1950, well, we started to buy pieces of property and improving all this property here. So they were loaning like $125 an acre with a production loan. And that's basically what they were allowing us. And we were clearing land and buying land. And so when fall came, we already had a bunch of our land rent was paid, you know, and we were building all the time. And anyway, we had a master note was supposed to be signed, and I went up and I talked to the new banker and made a deal with him, and we were financing back then. Your implement companies and all of those that were financing equipment, well, they were running like 10, 12, 13%, where your regular bank loans were in the 5 and 6%. So anyway, that's what you were talking about when we built that building down there. Well, that building came up for sale. Well, there was 2 buildings because that shop down there is an old equipment. I mean, it's an old machine shop from Beaumont. And then the hay barns and all that was an old cotton warehouse, which was up here in Beaumont. They used to ship a lot of cotton out in Beaumont. Well, we bought it and tore it down and rebuilt it. And then we did the same thing on the shop. We tore that building down. And one of them, or both of them, I think, I paid somebody to, I know the shop, I paid somebody to tear it down and haul it out here. And anyway, we were financing a bunch of all of our equipment through the bank up there. And the way we would do, we would get a master note and then and just draw on it as we needed the money. And so I told Eddie to go in and pick up that master note and bring it out so we could sign it, because we were going to need to buy a bunch of fertilizer and different things. And he went in, and anyway, then we just had our regular phone system. And so he called me at noon and told me that when he went in to pick up that note, that our note was for $125 an acre, plus we owed $90,000 on equipment, and he was going to include that in on our $125 deal, even though it was a separate loan, really. Well, we couldn't live with that. So I told my dad, I said, well, that wasn't the deal. And I said, they know better than that. They know what the deal was. So anyway, I went back to work, and Daddy came in that night, and I said, well, did you bring the note or whatever? What's going on? He said, no. My dad he didn't mince words too much, you know. I said, well, what did you do? He said, I told him to go to, you know where. He said that his money wasn't any better than that across the street or someplace else. And so that's when we moved to another bank, and I learned that all of this, that they had to take a lien on all these things. I moved to another bank where we borrowed a hell of a lot more money. And when I was signing the papers, well, I asked them where the collateral papers were. And they told me that with a financial statement like we had, they could loan that much on a signature loan. And that's some of the things you're not told, you know, by the bankers. So I've had quite a few experiences, and the cattle end of it is, it's been on another. It's never been on that rice loan, you know. It's always had to. Over there, we went to Oklahoma and bought a place, and what we did there was like a heifer calf. It runs from $15 to $25 a hundred cheaper than a steer calf. That's going into the sale barn. Well, when that you turn that heifer calf, you go the grazing route and make a feeder steer or a heifer out of it. They don't distinguish, maybe 2 cents out of them. So you buy heifers at 15 or 25, 15 to 25 cents cheaper than a steer calf, and you send them up there and put them on a grazing program and sell them. So you got a premium there on that. Plus the heifer will gain weight quicker than a steer calf will. They usually perform better, but they usually come out 100 pounds lighter. So but anyway, you only have a 2 cent maybe discount. And then the further north you go, it takes 2 cents a mile is the freight. So when you get her out from down here, and Oklahoma City is the pricing point for feeder cattle. That's what sets the market. And so we ship a bunch of cattle, and I sold on the place at 2% shrink, and usually we're no more than 2 cents off of the Oklahoma City market, which is the premium market in the country.
Isn't there a unique way you look at foreign markets and different things to try to predict prices coming up?
Yeah, that's like a book. Most people think I'm an ag, plus I've never had an ag class in my life. You know, ever changing ownership under today's price, that's probably about $100. And there's about 3 of those things that occur. There's a cow-calf man, then there's a grazing, then there's a stocker deal, the feed yard, and then there's the packer. And you look at it, somebody makes some money every year in there. And your ultimate destination, when you get to figuring on all this, if you're gonna play the game, you got to work on the plate price. The closer you get, that's what decides the ultimate worth of that animal, is that steak. Okay, we'll take a calf that's on the cow, and we're gonna sell that calf, and we're going through the auction barn. Okay. Well, it's gonna be 2 days. You're gonna be gathering that animal. Now, there's gonna be at least 2 days, not 2 days though. There's gonna be probably 4 days from the time you unload that calf at the sale barn to where he either finds order buyers, feed yard, or distribution point. So first thing you're gonna do, if you go through a sale barn, you got a 4% cost. You can go out there this morning and you've got a pen of cows and calves. And from the time you unload your horse out there in that pasture, you get that calf in the sale, in your pens, and get ready to load him on the truck. His loss is going to be anywhere from 2 to 4%. I've weighed calves like that and gone to the sale barns. Green calves, milk, fat calves, they'll shrink 10% by 10, 11 o'clock that night. My theory is that you need to be putting on at least 2 pounds a day from birth date. You need to average that. So that should be, if you take a calf at, you wean him at 7 months, He's born weighing 70. He gains 2 pounds a day. The difference from April to September is what? May, June, July, August, September. That's 5 months. That's 150 days. So he weighs, on the average, you're probably going to get, he'll be a 500-pound calf. I mean, that's what you're supposed to have in September.
Yes, sir.
That's when he's green. But he isn't that by the time he comes out of that sale barn. You got to put all that weight back on. And like the way we were doing, where we go through the feed yard, I can load him on a truck. We go to the feed yard. Well, he really doesn't miss. He can be back on feed. It's about a 12-hour drive. And the man will have feed in the trough up there. So he'll weigh in up there with maybe a 2% loss. He really doesn't lose anything. Yeah.
I had asked Joel, I talked to Joel Piku and told him, kind of we were doing this, and if you had ever given him any advice that really stuck with him. And he said, you can't starve a profit into cattle.
That's exactly what he got that from me.
That's what he said.
And the other thing, the cattle business isn't a yearly business. The cattle business is a 10 to 15-year business. That's the life of a cow. It's just like you buy a 1960 model car or truck. Okay, you're going to drive it for 10 years. Your cost and your income is going to be spread out over at least that 10 years. And you're not going to make, if you're in the hauling business, you're not going to make any money by saving money. You got to spend it before you can save it.
Yeah, like kind of well known for the quality of bulls y'all have. How did y'all get into that?
Well, cattle have always been my toy, my whatever you want. Cattle, horses, whatever. But basically the way we got into the bull business, really big time, I went through a AI school with Mr. Turner down in Anahuac. He and I went to the same AI school here in Beaumont. And artificial insemination. And I got a fellow, he was out of East Texas, I can't remember now. Anyway, I got some semen and I bred some cows with it. And I saw what some of these calves would do. And AI is all right under certain conditions, but southeast Texas, south of 10 or south of Highway 90 is a different ball game from Houston back to Florida, all along there. And I used AI, like I say, and saw what it would do. And that was about the time all these exotics started coming in. And we were making good money on rice, and we were in that high tax bracket, about 35-40%. So we bought a German Simmental bull, a Flegwick, paid $20,000 for him back in '80, and I was known as the dumbest ever walked. What in the world am I going to do with a $20,000 bull? Well, we had some Brahma cattle, and we had some Brayford cattle that we'd been using Hereford bulls on those cattle. The Simmental breed is the oldest breed that I know of that has data on them recorded. They're the first ones that went to data on performance and everything, quality grades and all that. And the Simmental, or any crossbred even, just F1s, you're going to get about 10-15% increase in performance. And the Simmental breed and some of these other breeds even do more than that. And what really rang a bell with me, Chuck Hiker and I were sitting on the front row of a meeting somewhere. I don't remember where it was, but they came in and said that's when DNA came in. And that fellow told me what you could do with DNA, how, well, it shortened information down instead of generations after generation. I mean, it's instant. There were very few of us that really picked up on the value of this. And we were able to buy some $10,000 to $20,000 bulls for $3,000 and $4,000 until the last few years. Now, DNA is that we don't buy a bull on it that doesn't have a DNA on it because it just, I don't know if you've seen a sheet on DNA. See, we test for about 13 or 14 different traits. That's from disposition, cavities, feed conversions, everything you can test for DNA. It's enabled the cattle industry to go from maybe 50% choice to 80-90% choice. We haven't realized the shortage in cattle until just the last 2 or 3 years. What we've been doing for the last 15 years is that we've shortened the finishing period on them, and we've increased the weight on them, and we've increased the quality so much. They've gone, well, just since back probably 5 years ago, the average quality grade of everything on the feeder cattle probably was 55 or 60% choice or above. Well, today it's 80-some%. You can't stand still. I mean, you got to keep moving or you will be out. They just keep raising the bar on what's acceptable or what's premium. My uncle Buster Floyd, he was up for draft and he was going for his examination. He was running a horse down the road in the Gilbert Woods, and that horse, his horse stumbled, and when he did, well, the horse fell and threw him off. Well, when he got up, well, that dang rope was around his neck and under his arm. And that horse dragged him all through the woods up there until finally he pulled up over around a tree, a little sapling or something, and it stopped the horse long enough for him to get it off, you know. And about that same time, one of the Middleton, there were two brothers of them, and one of them got killed down at Middleton's. I believe it's Middleton's ranch. This was in the 50s, I think. He was running a calf or something down there in the marsh or somewhere down there. And he ended up, the horse dragged him to death, and the horse fell with him, yeah. So I just won't tie off. Well, my mother was on the verge of TB for quite a few years, and so then we went to, the doctor prescribed, we went to Kerrville. They had a little tourist court there, and they'd spend the summer there. And Herbert Lee, Daddy got an order from a judge to get his driver's license. He wasn't but 14, but so he went with him. So Herbert Lee and David and Mother would go up there and spend summer. And Daddy and I'd come back and we batched and ran the place during the summer. But the first trip that we went out there, we had a old 36 Chevrolet four-door car, and we got in Flatonia. I don't know if you know where it is. I got sick, got to running fever. Well, Mother had a cabinet that she kept, it had a flour bin and up in the top. And anyway, the door latches, it just came out there, it had a little hook there. And then when you shut the door with that thing, well, I climbed up on top of that cabinet and I fell and I stuck that thing in my arm right in here and it got infected. And that's where they had to stop in Flatonia, go to a drugstore and get me some kind of medicine in there. That was when the Second World War was on. Well, that's when I had my first bus ride. As Greyhound buses. Greyhound used to be the international bus, they ran all over the country. And man, that first day, well, we take Mother and them up there. And then Daddy and I catch a bus at Kerrville and come to San Antonio and catch the train and ride the train back down here. Well, anyway, that bus went down the highway, went through Bandera, and that winding, crooked road, and those dang bus drivers, I mean, I was scared to death. I just thought, that's the first time I'd ever driven 60 or 70 miles an hour. And the first trip, we caught the bus and went to San Antonio. And when we got off of the bus, well, they let us out and went to the train station. Well, they'd just gotten an order in to move a whole trainload of troops. So we had to catch the bus back to Kerrville and get on the next morning and catch the train. But then, the train stopped at every one of those little towns and picked up people.
It's interesting.
Where did I put you all off? And you and the girls rode the train.
I remember going over that bridge in Baton Rouge where
Yeah,
you got over the water, and you just look down and you don't see a track. You just look down, We took went into Sunset Limited when
So how did it change once you grew up with brothers and an uncle and everybody, and then next thing you know you have daughters, and so how does that change a man from growing up with surrounded by brothers and men, and then now you're outnumbered by women?
Well, I got used to it. It's a pretty good life, if you're surrounded by females. It's got its pluses and minuses, but anyway, I wouldn't trade anything for it. So it's a different feeling when you've got a lot of responsibilities, and I don't know, we had a drought right after, wasn't too long after we married. I had water shortage. We were taking care of a lot of rice. I don't remember how many acres we had. Anyway, it got where stress got to me. And one morning I got up and went to go out and take care of the water, and then we rode all our levees on a horseback. We didn't walk them or anything. And I couldn't get on my horse. I had a just kind of breakdown. And so anyway, I just got back up, finally got on my horse. I loaded my horse up, and I came back to the shop and headed toward Winnie. That's when Dr. Rollo had a clinic right there where Windshire was. Well, that's when Sylvia kind of got the shock of her life. Her mother came down there, and they put me in the clinic there for about 3 days, I guess. And Dr. Rollo was delivering babies, and they walked down the hall, and they had the babies in apple crates. That was their crib. And that was a little bit of a shock to them. That's where Grandma Mo was his nurse there. But anyway, I just pulled out there on the road. I sat there for a while and finally sat down and told myself that, well, I either had to change my profession or change the way I looked at it. And I made up my mind that if the next fella could do it, I could. And so I just went on and I learned how to take care of the stress and the load but the rice business got, when it put back allotments and things, and there was no more land here to lease the rice farm, but there was a lot of all these fellows, rice farmers, just rice farms, and that way there was 3 to 4 months they were working, and the rest they were deer hunting. They was everything, doing the good life. And anyway, there was a lot of open country. They didn't have fences on much of this country, and that's when I started went into the cattle and with those started those calves, running a yearling operation, and during that period, when they came, we all came back out of the. My brother came back out of the service, and I got out of college, and David was there with. I told him that I would go to teaching, but I was going back to ranching or something, and that's when we started looking for land and leasing land. We've had cattle in, we fenced, I don't know how many miles of fence from the west side of Winnie, all that old Franzine place and all the airport down there, and all the way to 61. And we've had cattle in Trinity River bottom where Highway 90 was there. And anyway, that's been my mission to just utilize. The cattle were second. They're still on the bottom when it comes to farming and ranching. But now they've graduated to where they're a business. I mean, it's totally changed. Back then, a lot of people had some cattle, but they were just secondary. And there's a lot of opportunities out there, and you just gotta grab onto them and pursue them, I guess. And let Sylvia tell you the kind of places that you go to. She always said that she didn't know why we had to get the most isolated, run down and places. I'll have to give her credit. She's read many a book and sat in that pickup truck in all kinds of conditions for many a mile and many a year. And that's been our life. And I've always, I think the good Lord gave me the ability to apply my mathematical or my creative abilities, I guess you'd say, is to design a business and, progress with it.
How remote it was. One time I was sitting on a fence waiting for him to come out of a clump of trees looking for cattle, and dusk began to fall. You could hear night falling.
You can.
I promise
You can hear the grass, when it's been hot, and then evening, it makes a sound. You don't realize that, yeah.
you. It was so remote you couldn't see telephone line. There was nothing to focus on. Like where am I? If he has a heart attack in there, how would I tell anybody where I am? I don't even know where I am.
Right.
And there's no phones then. We didn't have that pocket phone.
That was before cell phones.
Yeah. We've had some good times, and we seen a lot of country, made a lot of friends. And I still, enjoy getting up and going to work and looking at, I'm always, a lot of innovative ideas that we put in place, like using liquid feed. They came out with it, and A&M wouldn't recommend liquid feed for years and years, and but it served a purpose for us down here on the coast because it was a way to supplement those cattle that you couldn't get to every day or every other day. And not only that, there's you can't hay cattle down in this country unless marsh cattle, and I mean down in that area, because once you hay them, then that they're not going back until you quit putting out hay. They get just like we've got so many people in this country now. If somebody will feed me, I'll eat it and you can do the work. Well, if you don't ever put out that bale of hay, well, you learn to hustle for yourself. And that's like after one or two of these droughts or, these floods and things. And people went up north of here and bought cattle, brought them in here. And I know of an incident or two that those people ended up coming like over here and buying syrup and feed from us. Those cattle wouldn't get their feet wet. And they just stood out and started, literally just kind of, it was a slow starvation, but I mean, they wouldn't go out and graze enough to make it. And that's the rule of thumb here is that you can move cattle north and west, but you don't move cattle south and east because this is marginal country here. And their stomach is not developed. Their stomach is not big enough, and they don't physically go out and harvest their food. And
Is that one of the biggest challenges of raising cattle in southeast Texas?
Yeah, that's one of them. I mean, and you've got to have a touch of Brahma blood, quarter Brahma blood, to get the heat stress and there's a hybrid vigor there that the Brahma cow blood is really on the edge. They're totally different genetic makeup on the Brahma blood. It's an out and out cross. In other words, you can cross a Brahma almost any breed, but and you can, and even one of the things that's really amazing that like you take Hereford bull on Brahma cow, and you can take the identical mama cow and use a Hereford bull back on a F1 heifer, and you don't get that vigor, even though it's exactly the Brahma cow is a better mother than the Hereford cow is. And the Hereford cow, the reason they do good out west of here, the grass is stronger, and so once a calf gets up 2 months old, he can make it on West Texas grass or dryland grass because that grass is a lot stronger than here. We got so much water in the grass, and the soil even is a different composition. And the brown cow's milk, even though she milks less than the other cows, the butter fat doesn't rise, and Brahma milk like it does. It's stronger milk.
So when did y'all meet? When did y'all meet? What part of life?
We met when she was 15 years old. And did y'all know Buddy Wilbur? You remember? Buddy died, I guess. You don't remember? He had the real estate thing in Winnie. Anyway, the three of us decided that we were going to make a wild trip. We went to Bandera up through there. And that was back then. Bandera was the nude capital of the world. I don't know if y'all remember that. I mean, they had, what?
It was the Dude Ranch capital.
Yeah, the Dude Ranch capital. And so all the rich girls and went there for the summer vacation, and they had the Air Force Base out there, so all the soldiers, so Bandera was a blooming town at night. And anyway, we had gone, they had a little tourist court, and it wasn't a tourist court either, but sort of a place to stay, a cabin deal connected to this drugstore. And anyway, we walked into that drugstore, and Benny, Deaton, and Sylvia were in there, and they were across the room over there. And so that's when they had their names on their belts. That was a big deal then. Well, I called Benny's name out, and Benny turned around, anyway, Sylvia told her, well, that she said, I know him. And she said, no, you don't know him. He's just reading your name off of your belt. That's all it is. Well, anyway, that led to me meeting her there. And we went to a dance that night, and I've been going with her ever since. You can't hear her, can you?
You said you went to the dance that night and what?
Well, that's where I met you. Well, I came home and she didn't give me a phone number or anything. So her maiden name is Webb. She's not any kin to these down here. But I looked up and called every dang Webb name in Jefferson and Chambers County. And finally, I don't know how I made connections with her anyway. And I've been going with her ever since.
What year was that?
I was 51 when, yeah. And we got married in July the 20th of 57. That's 67 years, I think. Well, we got married in 57, and Stacy was born in October of 60. So about 3 years.
And what is that? You kind of touched on it earlier about responsibility and becoming a father and stuff like that. But how does that change a man to become a father?
Well, the back 70 years ago, if you were a father and a husband, you assumed a lot more responsibility than what a lot of the husbands and things. That's your number one priority, is looking after your wife and your kids and whatever. You don't look at it lightly, like I think a lot of them do now. You know, it wasn't a me society then. It was a us. That's the difference. Being a self-employed businessman, that puts, you've got to make a decision every morning, every second of your life. Where I've got 24 hours in a day, and I've got certain abilities, and I've got certain obligations. And so where I've got to make that decision, do I concentrate on my wife and family? Do I concentrate on the business? Or do I concentrate on myself? It's a lot different from, and I'm not belittling the fellow that goes to the refinery and gets a job, but his life is a different life from the little independent businessman or whatever profession you're in, you know.
Has that changed for you over the years? Your thoughts on that?
No, well, probably, you know, if I had to go back, I probably would have spent more time with my family, I guess. But sometimes you don't have a choice. I mean, you never really have a choice. You just got to figure out how much time and effort you will put in each area, and hopefully you're keeping everything going on, and it makes life it builds character, I can tell you that. And you learn to appreciate and know that you can't do any of it alone from the good Lord on. And I guess one of the things about being a businessman or life itself is that we can do everything we can do, but the good Lord is the one that commands what we probably have less in farming. I'd say we probably don't have over maybe 5 or 10% of control over the ultimate outcome of what we do. We depend on the good Lord. We can do whatever, and it's got to come from there and filter down. And you learn that I've met a lot of people that's been from every class, every color, and you can learn from every one of them. And you, and I don't care where you are on the economic scale or the educational or whatever, every one of them has something special about them that you can learn from, and they have some worth. I mean, each one of us have value. I was on the school board for a long time, and we would have what they call problem kids, and some of the board would say, well, they want to throw the book at them. And I always said that we had a lot more problem parents than we did kids, and that before you make all these rash decisions to just throw them away, I said 99% of us haven't walked in the shoes of these kids that are so-called problem kids. And until you've walked in their shoes, you you can't make those. Every decision I've ever made, I've never made a black and white decision. Every decision you make in life, there's a gray area, and you're going to affect somebody or something in a negative way and a positive way. And you just got to measure which is what you do is more on the positive side than the negative side.
I told you I talked to Joel, and he said that Mr. Dishman told him one time the two hardest things in life are to stay married and to stay in business. And he said Harold Clubb's done good at both those.
Joel has done, he has stood up to his obligations. I don't know how many of y'all know. I mean, he's been married since he was, 16 or 17 years old. He hadn't shirked his responsibility or anything. So I have a lot of respect for Joel.
I asked him, I said, would there be anything that surprised me about Harold?
I didn't hear you.
I said, would there be anything that surprised me about Mr. Clubb? And he said, one night after the rodeo in Beaumont, me and my wife, we met y'all. They met y'all two for a couple drinks after the rodeo, and he said, "Mr. Clubb is a party animal." That was his exact quote. So I don't know if you have any wild Bandera stories or anything you want to tell us.
No, never been drunk in my life.
Really?
Never. Nope. I don't think we've ever had any wild parties, but we've had a good time. I guess what surprised me about today's world, when we were growing up, dancing was really important. I mean, you went places, and we always had a New Year's Eve. We always had, and they just had regular dances. And I guess we spent a many hour on the dance floor. And met a lot of great people. I guess one of the things, we started square dancing when we were, Melissa's born in 65. And so that was about the middle 70s, we joined the Square Dance Club. And we danced, how many years, Mom, did we? About 10 years, we square danced, or more than that. We met a lot of good people there. We really had a lot of good times. And so we've had a varied life. I mean, I've been involved in all kinds of businesses and been to Washington, D.C. several times. I've been in, I guess, one of the experiences. We have water issues now, and I hadn't been out of school very long. We had a drought here, and all these oil fields out here around Winnie. Those wells, they didn't take very good care of the salt water, and it drained down into the Mayall Bayou and Taylor's Bayou, where we couldn't use it for the rice. And anyway, we ended up with a lawsuit against the oil companies to make them correct that. And if you've never been on the witness stand or whatever, in front of a group of attorneys, well, you haven't lived yet. I've served on the grand jury, which is really an experience. And we've also been in a lawsuit against the federal government. And did you ever figure out who enforces the law on the federal government? Well, you learn that when you go to court with them and you win the court. You win the decision, but you don't get any action. But back on the ranching part, right after we were married, well, I bought 3 yearling colts from a fellow by the name of Floyd Parker. And so I broke, back when I was growing up, since I was about 13 or 14 years old, well, I rode all the horses that we broke, most of them, And those 3 we bought, they had a buckskin which was her horse. And then they had a bay mare and one of these gray mares. Well, the buckskins, we ended up made a good horse, and she rode it a lot, and I did too. But the bay mare, she jumped. I've never been on a horse that jumped like that. I had a short sleeve shirt, and my shirt was out of my pants, and she jumped so hard that she almost tore that shirt off of me. When she hit the ground, my shirt, that pommel was going under my shirt and tearing it up. But so I rode her several times, and finally I told Daddy, I said, good horses are too cheap to ride this kind of animal. So I sold her to Kaler's down there. They had a rodeo string of horses, and I don't think she would ever ridden down there. And the gray mare, I rode her for a while, and she got where she was bucking. And my dad always milked the cow in the southeast corner of the barn in a stall. It had a flap door, and then the trap where we caught the horses and rode the horses were right outside there. Well, I got on that mare one morning, and I mean, she was, back then, these more Mustang type horses, they bellowed all the time. You ever hear a horse bellow when they buck? Well, when you get one that does that, well, anyway, it was getting pretty interesting. And my dad opened that door and he said, "Rider, rider." And I never remember. I said, "Well, what the hell do you think I'm trying to do?" But it's, I've had a good life. A lot of incidents. Before as the opportunities are still out there. You just gotta latch on to them and hang in there. Another incident pertains to, like, my dad. So, but he was born in 1901. I don't know if I told you about him. Gathering cow dung for, well, he said his first job was, they would call the cows in at night and shut them up. They used to always call it the cornfield or the highland field. That's where they they'd raise their big garden in, and they'd shut those cows up in there at night, and then they'd turn them out the next day, and they'd go graze, and they'd come back in at night, and they'd shut them up. Well, the kids' job was when that cow dung got hard, they went out there and they gathered all that and carried it up. They always had a big garden right behind the house, and its cornfield would be bigger, maybe a 10 or 15 acres, and to use for fertilizer. And then his next job, he said, was hauling firewood to the steam engine that pulled the separator. And he and Mr. Ole DeVere were in a barber shop down here when Willie Bertrand had a barber shop down there. And Willie was telling me that Daddy and Mr. Oleet were in there. Mr. Oleet was 2 or 3 years older than Daddy. And they were that was when we just gone to the moon. And my dad and Mr. Oleet was saying that they doubt that anyone would experience the drastic change from where they came from to going to the moon. And I thought that was a big expanse, but now modern electronics and things, I don't know if it was. I don't know what the next 100 years will bring, you know.
I guess, is there any timeless principles that you would say that you would hope the grandchildren would keep on preserving?
I'd like to see them preserve the animal deal, and they're interested in prolonging. I think that we have a rare, unusual area right here. There isn't a area like this between Corpus Christi and New Orleans, I guess, that has all the different facilities and the I mean, you can access the Gulf of Mexico from right here. You know, you're tied into this type of climate. You got all the refineries. You got every business you can imagine, and I think you've got a population that is so diverse. You know, Beaumont in the athletic field. Y'all realize how many outstanding athletes in Beaumont? Have you been to the Gulf Coast Museum? Did you ever see the variety? Did you read about the fellow that tested the airplanes and things? I was up on the top floor. He's the fellow that pilots the new aircraft that have never been in flight. And he's flown there's just so many outstanding people in all fields. You got to be seeking to stay ahead of the pack. I mean, they got a little cartoon that I always relate to. They show a rabbit running out there, and they got about 20 dogs after him. And of course, they all lined up just one after the other. And the caption says, if you aren't the lead dog, the scenery's all the same. Think about that.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah. Where is that at?
I saw it somewhere about 10 years ago. And, yeah, so I guess, but like I say, there's opportunities, whatever, it doesn't matter what business you're in. Just do your best at that. And there's no disgrace to being a ditch digger or plumber or whatever profession there is. There's good ones and there's bad ones, and you the opportunities are there, but it takes a special effort, and you've got to pretty well keep at it. I mean, I see opportunities every day. You just got to grab it and take off with it. I'd like to see this area preserved as far as the landmass of it, maintained, trees and all the fish and the wildlife and all those things. And I think every day it's going to become more valuable when you think of all the people, all the refineries, those people are going to need a place like y'all were talking about, the kid and the grown-ups too. The lakes are full up there, and not everybody can drive 50, 75, or 100 miles to enjoy what the good Lord has gave us right here. And like I say, that's where, like y'all were talking about, the nature. There's, I guess, we miss so much of what the God has provided us in beauty. And have you ever watched a spider build that spider web? Have you ever sat down and watched one of them? That's amazing. We let them every once in a while. They put a net across one of these openings in the carport, and that dang spider, he'll go around there, and you notice that back leg when they cross, he reaches back there and hooks it and keeps going. And his measurement's pretty dang good. And the other thing, out this window right here, it's about 40 foot from that oak tree over there to the flower bed or the roof here on this house. And every once in a while, I'll get up in the morning and there's a dang spider web hanging from the top of that oak tree to the eaves of this house. And you figure out how you got that? The only thing I can figure, they either weave a web and let the wind blow it, or I don't know, or they catch a little leaf or something and let it blow over that. It's the only way I can understand.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever take one of those wood spiders and try to make it run out of thread? You can wrap all day, and that's all we're going to produce. That spider web.
You want to take the seat?
Not really.
Not really?
But as well.
What breaks my heart nowadays is to see a couple at a table with their children. Maybe the children will be coloring. Mama's on the phone, daddy's on the phone. And the kids are so eager. They want to show mom and dad their work, and they're not the least bit interested.
Well, what it has caused, all this information, this free information that's out there, you probably noticed it in school. 90% of the people don't have time to remember anything. They don't care about the remembering because they've got a source, you know. And that's what the old economics professor I had, Dr. Setzer, and at Lamar, he told us early on, he said, let me tell you something. He said, that was in Economics 101, I guess. He said, don't try to remember a whole string of phone numbers, all of these different numbers and things that's in your life. He said, just remember the source, because he said your mind is not big enough. You can't remember all these things. So you've got to rely on just try to remember the source, where you go to get it. And that's what's happened. So now they, most of them just don't put any effort into remembering or analyzing, or they, that's what I find about the banking world. They know how to add 2 and 2 is 4, but when they add a whole string of those numbers on your loan and they get out at the end and you can look at it and you know there's something wrong. Well, they don't know, they're lost. They don't know where the mistake is. They don't know what those numbers mean, how they affected the final outcome. And just we don't think anymore in so many cases. And I mean, that's not all now. I mean, we've got them out there that, I mean, they're a lot smarter than I am, a lot more. What just blows me away is take a language, for instance. I just heard the other day that there's 80 some different languages. And how do you develop a language? How do you put it on paper? They said that like like Jennings can make the sound of a lot of dogs, different animals, and they say that those first few years, your vocal cords records those sounds, as they found, and because she hears something once or twice, and she can duplicate. No one sat down and preached to her and told her how to say cat or how to make a sound. It's God given. Well, this is what, the big word now is sustainability. And I told some of them, I said, y'all taking this word and blowing it up like it's something new. I said, tell me, what was from the time of conception, what was your number one aim? Sustainability, right? And that's, there's a lot of things blow me away. That, for instance, the fire to the eyes, but this thing, these sound waves, how the hell do you send my voice 2,500 miles? How did that first fella, or I still don't know how the second and the third, have you ever seen a radio wave? So how the hell do you deal with something that you can't see? And how does the 10 digits send a man to the moon? We had a group of ringneck geese that, you know where Old Big Hill crosses 73? Well, that was what we call the Groves land, that 320 right there. Well, right out there from that where that crossing is, we had about a dozen to 20 head of old Canadian geese that would come back and land within 5 acres on that 10-acre block. I mean, it was an open field, but you could walk wintertime, they would be there. And they may be short, 2 or 3 big ones, and then they'd have 2 or 3 little ones. Well, here they are, they've traveled 3,000 miles and can find 1 acre in a million.
I said, and then people don't believe in God. Like, how do you know God is real? Well,
Look around. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I can't do that, so I don't see how anybody other than God could have.
Well, you got to say there's something greater than man. And the other, why was man given the abilities that we have? We're the only ones that have the ability to create. You know, most other species, they can duplicate, but they can't create. Why was man given this opportunity? Yeah,
Need help with anything?
Maybe
you,
once we break everything down and get it loaded, if y'all can just directional put us everything back. Because
Just take
we
your time, do whatever you need
No.
to do.
Not a problem.
want to put everything back the way it was.
We just needed him to tell us his name and age. All that stuff.
All right, you do.
Okay. Can you tell me my name is today's date and then your birthday? For the camera.
okay, Harold,
Can you say my name is?
my name is Harold Daniel Clubb.
One more time. Go ahead.
My name is Harold Daniel Clubb. I'm 92 years old. I was born October the 9th, 1932, in Beaumont, Texas. I've never lived outside of Jefferson County. So now you're going to sell these as scarecrows or?
No, we just wanted to do this, and we don't have any videos of our grandparents or anything, you know. And we thought there's so many great stories that people have, but we don't just want to do grandparents. We want to do a lot of people, but give it back to Jay Storm and Jake, and so that they can have something to remember everybody, you know.
Joel has a unique ability to, he enjoys almost every moment of life. Have you ever seen him without a smile?
I say I have.
Joel is a lot more capabilities than a lot of people realize. He observes a lot of things. He thinks pretty deep a lot of times too. He's helped me from since he was about, I guess he was maybe 18 or 20, and he, if he's a friend of yours, he's a friend of yours too. But in all of these problem kids, you know what? The ones I've worked, what they wanted was discipline.
A little bit
And
structure.
and you think about it, everybody thinks that let your kids make their own decisions. Well, you probably can relate to this. That's okay. You go out here and there's half a dozen of you old boys get over there and decide y'all gonna pull some wild ass prank or something, and the other five of them, they can do their own choosing and do what they want to. They have no limitations. You have limitations, and so you want to pull out on them.
It is Michael.
I won't.
If
Thank you
you
for reminding me.
if you're one of those five, and you want to pull out, you become a wimp.
Right.
But your numbers, that five, that your daddy and mom told you that if you go out and pull some of this, you can sleep outside tonight or you can get your meal somewhere else. Then you've relieved your mom and daddy's taking the giving tells them why you acted like you did. Those other, they don't have anybody to lean back on. So you haven't given them anything,
Right.
you see. And they want somebody to build the boundaries for them, those problems.
Yeah, I agree.
And we worked quite a few of those boys, and I could name them, I won't name them. But every one of them has come back and thanked me, saying, how tough I was on them, what it had done for them.
Exactly.
I used to tell my kids, being a mother is not a popularity contest. There's going to be times that you're not going to like me.
Of course.
And I'm going to not like the way you act either.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sylvia came along in the picture, and